every day, playing your favorite songs. This is Feferity Radio.
Your style, my style, freestyle.
Beautiful sound there, Afrikan. Nobody. I did tell you all around that we're working very hard behind the scene so we can get our listeners to interact with us on all various forms of medium, especially on the radio website. And we've just uploaded a link that you can send a chat with us. You can chat with us here on Feferity Radio. We're going to try it out. I don't know if you want to try it out for me and let me know. Thanks there to our, web team who is working very hard. Also our design team working very hard as well. To make things much more beautiful for all of us. And I want to say thank you to all of them. This track, when I play this track, you know exactly what it's for, because this is the track I use underneath when I'm doing my interviews. Roy Ayers, I'm Your Mind. In a little while, we're speaking to Kenneth Cuvalay. A psychiatrist nurse, specialising in psychiatric addiction. Today is all about, or continuing with, our spiritual well-being.
My sister, I am your mind. Within you is a never-ending magnitude of infinite strength, wisdom, and will. You travel my roads through life never knowing your own true reality because my thoughts remain like distant quasars. You abuse me, never letting me say and do as I feel. Our thoughts split from love affairs to choice of friends. We argue like two enemies, yet we are good friends. Now there are moments when we harmonize with each other and become one with nature and reality. But these times are few, when after you have replenished yourself, the fear of the truth sets in. We split and you start to run again. Running through women, men, jobs, people, and life, looking for the answer when I had it all along. But I smile, because I am your mind. I was your mind yesterday, I am your mind today, and I'll be your mind tomorrow. And as our end draws near, we will become closer. But you and I, we will never be one. For I will part from you, and you will part from me. You finding another mind, and I another soul. And we'll travel on and on. By the way, I need more than sex to nourish my equilibrium. But I do need sex. I also need sun, trees, stars, creativity, and love. But you saturate my soul with too much of one and not enough of the other. Therefore I cry. But why do we cry? Because tears cleanse the windows of our minds. I am your mind. All your thoughts inside your mind, wanting to be free. Well, now you've got the chance to let your mind grow and be free. Because the music is just trying to say things to free your mind. And if you let your mind be free, then you can understand mine. There's no need afraid of me. I want to be your friend. I'm just trying to give you music from deep within. All of your dreams can become reality. My dial reaches full. But you've only been turning me halfway. Turn me up, and alpha and theta waves will spew from your pores. Knowledge, peace, happiness, and prosperity will be placed at your feet. Let's create, solve, love, accomplish,
That is so beautiful. Some songs just touches you. Did you hear that cough? I'll turn it down for a little bit. Well, he's on the line, Kenneth Cuvalay. I hope he's all right. He just had a bit of 2 coughs there. But this is such a beautiful track. I Am Your Mind, Royez. So here on Feferity Radio, when you hear this, especially from me, that means time to speak, to talk to my special guest, Kenneth Cuvalay. So Kenneth, how you doing?
I'm okay. I thought, guess you were hearing me coughing a bit, eh?
Just a tiny bit.
Well, you know, coughing is a natural thing. Nowadays, people tend to get hysterical if one just cough a bit. The other day, I was on the telephone talking to a gentleman in the Caribbean, and I start coughing, and he cried out right away, Mr. Cuvalay, Kenneth, you have COVID-19, you know, so everybody seems to be reacting nowadays with even the natural things which you're accustomed or your body accustomed to doing at times. So yes, I was coughing. I came out of a cold room and I came downstairs to join you, and I end up into the heated room, and somehow that's tend to irritate my respiration system at times. With all of the pollution which is taking place naturally at the same time in and surrounding us, we tend to forget that at times, which actually really interfere with your respiratory system at times.
Well, of course.
So good evening to you. Yeah, sorry, brother. Go ahead.
No, I mean, I was saying you're right. I mean, cough is a natural thing. And it's irritated by so many different factors, and but like you said, these days, it's a strange thing. It's funny how we kind of slowly psychologically deviate from what is natural, and then trying to be much more suspicious of the same thing, and it is very incredible. But I know you're all right.
Glad. Thanks for asking. I am all right. So good evening to you once again, and to the broader public in the UK, and to our African sisters and brothers in the African community in the UK. Good evening to all.
And good evening to you, sir, and to all the people in the Netherlands and in St. Eustatius as well. Good evening, and everyone around who is listening and knows Kenneth Cuvalay. I want to say I appreciate your company here with us on Feferity Radio. And
it's a pleasure.
Thank you, sir. How about your family and the people around? Because we need to be asking on a frequent basis as well. Are they all right?
Yeah, everybody's fine. I'm in contact with them frequently. Everybody's fine. Doing fine. Just trying to cope with all of the madness around them and the decline of income and decline of economical income and economical resources. These islands, a lot of them were dependable and still dependable on the tourist industry. So that's actually is a chain reaction which disrupt all of the job and people who have had work for some time, depending on that industry, which goes around as a chain reaction in different areas. So people are really now coping with that and trying to come to terms with how they can deal with that situation with lacking income.
It is a really, really tough time. I mean, the longer it goes on, and I think the strain will begin to show even on people who are very strong mentally. Don't you think so?
Well, it has an effect on everybody. You see, that's the whole thing. Well, even the strong in which physically speaking, yes, it has its repercussion on those as well. You have a different strong at the same time. These islands, what you really see happen at time, it took place with the the last hurricane in the region, which we had as well. The rich was able to escape and go and look for shelter elsewhere when the hurricane came. So what you see too, since COVID-19, a lot of Europeans and Americans, white Europeans and Americans for that matter, they found a way off of these islands. So basically, the people who are confronted with all of the misery and having to cope with everything are the people from the islands themselves. And most rich people how and find escapism in a way to escape from everything. That does not necessarily indicate that they will escape from COVID-19, because COVID-19 doesn't make no distinction between rich or poor.
Absolutely. The things that and also the economic side is one aspect of it, but the social aspect, and I think is a strain that, when you look on the social media, you look on articles, is causing everybody a considerable concern.
Yes, and it continued to get even more complicated because right now in Germany, the US, and I guess the UK as well, as I was reading in a medical journal not too long ago, they're having a new disease which they call it the mystery disease, by the way, which they cannot really pinpoint. And right now, the scientists are putting a correlation with that mystery disease, which is affecting children at a very young age, because primarily when COVID-19 started out, most Western scientists claimed that children and young people would not be affected, and now there's this developing trend where you're seeing the children are dying in a huge number with a very complicated disease, which they call the mystery disease, which they cannot point or clarify at this point in time, but do put a correlation with COVID-19. So yes, indeed, it's troubling to one and all constantly.
I don't know also about your frequent, in terms of the groups that you're part of on WhatsApp or Facebook. But for me, I was saying earlier on, what I have noticed, especially for the last month or so, the images that are coming is either to make African or black people so vexed, or to make everyone so fearful and be on the edge of anxiety, that tipping edge. I don't know what you've been seeing on your social media. Do you think it's the same? For example, though, I don't know, you must have seen, probably, you should have seen this one, or maybe seen it. Is a photo of a police officer. This happens in the UK, where there was a confrontation with him and a white guy, and took out his taser, but they didn't tase him. And also another incident on the same clip, they showed another black guy being tased. And I thought, this is definitely, it's got nothing to do with what is going on. It's not helping anyone. It's just to make people vex. I don't know if you've seen that. And what do you make of the videos that are coming through now?
Well, a lot of these, and that's what makes it so complicated and create a lot of extreme anxiety. And then the bigger question is, what is COVID-19 really used for a time to inject more fear, or to actually isolate and disadvantage, especially African people in the various communities? You have been seeing this in all different forms, also in the Netherlands, where there's huge amount of control in the African communities in the Netherlands here, more than in white communities. You've been seeing it lately, a coverage here in the US, where in a region where no one will be held or being questioned for being a burglar whatsoever. African citizen, black, in that region has been gunned down and killed, and it's just coming out in the news right now. And even in relation to the continent, the motherland, if you look at the different coverage and at times the comments which is coming out of the Western world media in relation to the African continent, that's why the president of Tanzania lately had to recount some of these negativities coming out of the Western world media relating to the continent Africa as well. So indeed, and I also questioned myself and asked myself, what is this new norm is about? Is it about killing more black Africans around the world? Is it about penalizing and isolating our communities more and clamping down on them more? Is it about distinction within the medical structures and institutions, whereof doctors of non-white doctors and so are dying more in the forefront of this COVID-19 world which we are living in? So I asked myself the question, and I posed it out there to many of us who are actually on the radio and on social media. What are their take on the developing different forms of abuse at time and clamping down on our people globally, hugely, and at time mortality rate goes along with that at the same time. So it's a big concern, and the bigger question is, what is COVID-19 being used for, and as a cover up to inject or how must I say, create new forms of methods towards different groups of people. Is it serving that purpose? Because when you look at our black community, the African community globally, we are being the biggest sufferers right now in this age and time more ever than any time in history, I would say. So yes, we need to question it.
I mean, if I could just take a moment to ask you, because I know the Netherlands and most of the Caribbean countries are more closer to the United States. And the United States, Donald Trump has been on in the news for a very long time. It doesn't matter what your views is. I mean, I don't have a view. The only view I had was when, the election, during the time of the American election, the clips that were coming out of it, I mean, what he said about women and all of that, I mean, that kind of stick. But I try to understand things from a very neutral point of view. And most, leaders are saying and speaking the same language. I think he is much more different. And at the same time, a lot of, organizations are not happy with the way he's dealing with things, and probably personally himself, because, just recently he was also, you can say, the first president to march for pro-life. So I don't know what you make of Donald Trump in this time.
Well, what I make of Donald Trump in this time, how must I put it, Donald Trump, I really ask myself too, at times, is Donald Trump not the wise for a greater power behind the whole situation? But yet, okay, we know that Donald Trump marginalized constantly African people, women, etc., and goes about everything basically from a personality point of view, as if he is he's autonomous on this planet, as if everything which happened in this world is about Donald Trump. And I in this case, Donald Trump is more self-centered, and I believe Donald Trump will say anything at times just to actually differentiate or guide the issues in an adverse, destructive direction when you come to the substance of the issues. And you're seeing it playing out with even people within his administration who seems to have been affected now by COVID-19, that he is not even open for the reality in this sense and distract everything in another direction. So Donald Trump is, among others, and his base, I think, a potential threat to certain structures and institutions. But when it comes to our people, in particular the African people globally and in the US, I think the whole situation, whether it's Donald Trump or whosoever before him was in administration, in this wake-up call moment within the age of COVID-19, I think our people are the ones who are actually getting the bitter end of the stick more drastically. If you look at the white community, which is a bigger percentage in the US than our African people of who are living there among Asian, their mortality rate is almost double at times. Looking at the differences, the discrepancy between white and black. So I think we as African need to look at our position and see what we are going to do, align with each other globally in whichever way, in protecting and creating security more for us, and in contact and also working together with the motherland, the mother country, because I don't think we can separate the two from each other.
No, we
so
can't.
in a nutshell, that's my take on Trump, but it goes beyond Trump.
Yeah, indeed. It's just that everybody, and sometimes when you see, especially the West, when everybody is talking about one person, it doesn't mean sometimes that person is a bad person. Neither it doesn't mean it's a good person. It's just the attention and the focus being cast. And I think we have to be very clever enough to understand why.
Exactly. Because we speak about Obama at time. Even Obama at a point in time was not that promising for our African community neither. There's a lot of more which he could have done at the same time. So that's why I said, whether it's a previous administration of Trump or Obama or Bush or whatsoever, I think we are, as a people, have been within the taken constantly, chronically, for over more than 400 years, the bitter end of the stick in all regards. Only thing I'm saying in this time, I think, as you look at how whosoever, now if you look at Trump and China, they're the one out there semantically accusing each other of this situation. I think the reality is more complicated, and the reality is something which actually are not being on the stage for the common people to understand it, because even if you present probably the reality to the masses of this planet, what really is reality, they might not even want to believe that that's reality. So again, it's a very complex situation for the situation of human being on this planet. And I continue to emphasize constantly that we as Africans have been having the bitter end of everything throughout the centuries on this planet constantly. So it's about, I think it's a wake up, and should be a wake up call for us as how we African work together, treat each other, and want to tend to cooperate with each other. I think we can be a greater force if we collectively, with bigger vision, manage our own interests, understanding, and destiny.
If we're going to put that in context in terms of spiritual well-being or spiritual life or tradition, how would one put that in context of what is going on now? How, as a social psychiatrist, psychiatric nurse, seeing what is happening at this moment, and we've been looking at our spiritual well-being, areas in which, to maintain tradition, to maintain, what the ancestors, people who've gone before, who've done, have left us with some form of a pattern in which we could coordinate and understand our individual self, and then work collectively as a people. How would you put in context in terms of what is going on now? How would you link that to any form of spirituality? Would you say, because I've had something like this where, people are referring to even virus as a vial, as a spell. What is going on now? As a spell, as a witchcraft, and all this kind of stuff. So in the context of African spirituality, how would you put that to let us understand how we should supposed to move ahead in this time?
Yeah, okay. In these social psychiatrical nurse, but also specialized not only in psychiatry, but also in psychological education, which for better terminology, psychoeducation. But to answer your question, I think it's important we look a bit and take especially when it comes to African spirituality and our mental being as such in relation to our identity. If we go back just for a moment and you look at the enslavers who did enslave our ancestors, their aim was to culturally commit genocide and inflict that upon us in the broader sense of the meaning of the word. The destruction of our cultural values, our institution, our spiritual system, language, and libation on the plantation of the Americas and throughout the rest of the Caribbean in general. The preoccupation of such of the enslavers, like I said, was the assassination of African identity. Now, because of the realization that Africans who know and knew themselves, they could not be forced, they maybe could have forced them into a form of captive labor. But the enslavers realized also those Africans who knew themselves and know themselves could never be enslaved in the most profound ways. That is meaning to say spiritually and mentally. So they retain their identity. And if you look throughout the Americas and the Caribbean in the whole, when you look at our ancestors and their continuous determination to survive and live, a lot of them took along with them their meaning of spirituality and their mental force in retaining their identity as our powers of itself. Our ancestors' strategies, for instance, for survival in the hostile world of the plantation were to the survival of liberation and other aspects of the African culture in the Caribbean and the Americas in general. So to answer your question, when it comes to our the lives of them in the Americas, our ancestors, and the conception of community, it became an important guide in the construction of African in the diaspora community in general sense. The strength of African culture and identity and the capacity to resist and to make revolution was even part of that. We can go back into Haiti and look at Africans in Haiti where they retain the power of voodoo. We can go down into Berbice in Guyana, where African culture were retained, not only just retained in the psychological, emotional way, but also by actually military defeating European forces, for instance, between 1791 and 1804, and between 1763, where they replaced these powers from outside with revolutionary governments in those regions as powers. So the spirit and within the spirituality of our ancestors mentally and physically, is here to be seen today in various parts of the Caribbean, throughout the Americas as well.
Yeah.
I know it's a mouthful, but if it's not clear, I will come back on some of the aspects and go down even deeper into them. So to answer your question, when it's related to our spirituality and our mental power in relation to spirituality, you have to take in consideration our cultural values, the institution which we stood for at the time, our spiritual system, and importantly, more important than everything, although all of them is important, but our language in essence. Because we obtain and are using language which has really been distracting us from a lot of our heritage in that capacity. It's like we, in our last program, we spoke about a house. A house in the Caribbean, to my parents, was a place where you have a roof upon your head. But then when you look at the European concept of a house, you have apartments, you have bungalows, you have villas. But all of them constitute the one single thing, a roof above your head to protect you from outside influences. But all of these different terminology became so complex and distractive that even people in their own community are having to fight and to understand what's the difference between all of them at times, much less we who are actually Africans in the diaspora, who has been distracted in so grave, horrendous way from our languages, our institution, our spiritual systems, and our cultural values. That's what the planters, the enslavers, decided to destroy at the time, but was not able to complete their mission in that context, because we are here still today as a people.
Indeed. So how would you relate technology to our spirituality? Is this something that works hand in hand, or is something that is destructive to our spirituality, or is something that enhances our spirituality?
It goes hand in hand, because you cannot have the powers of our spirituality if we doesn't have institutions and structures within our institution. Again, I think it was Benin not too long ago who outspelled the Catholicism and reinforce and reinstate one of their natural form of ceremonial meanings within the structures of ceremonies, within schools, etc., which actually you can base it on to what we call voodoo today or voodoo in Haiti. And so these are some of the spirituality powers which we are in line or actually has as heritage, but they go hand in hand with the structures. The structures even mean already, when you look at our ancestral way of order within communities, you look at the elderly, you look at the kids, the children in between there, you look at the position of women and men. But all of them has a fundamental role to play within the institution and the structures which maintain our African civilization. So spirituality in religion, in relation to ceremonies, whether it would be executing a marriage, a couple getting married from an African spiritual ceremonial point of view, is completely different than that of the Western world. So it all goes in hand. And that is one of the things which we are struggling with today, to regain our original values and spiritual system within the institution and the structures which our ancestors laid out for us as a part of our civilization to exist as people.
That's right. I mean, the question I was asking there, or what I want to know is how technology, is technology relate or enhance or distract our spiritual wellness?
Well, it depends when you speak about technology. When what we are talking about. Look, if I take the nuclear atom bomb, which the Western world proclaim it has to take and prevent going into hands of people in rogue state. Again, they are the same people who proclaim to be civilized and who throw the most horrendous atomic bomb on the human race on this planet. So if you ask me if that form of technology is beneficiary to our existence on this planet, no. But if you ask me if the technology of the architecture of building and creating other sophisticated technical instruments within institutions, like how we can still look at the pyramids today and the architectural work of pyramids, or we even go to the south of Spain and we look at where I think was our African brothers and sisters, the Moors, built these immense temples and buildings which actually represent part of Spain today. That also is a form of technology. So technology is a very broad understanding, and it depends what type of technology we are speaking about. Is it beneficiary for mankind, or is it something destructive for mankind? I tend to say our ancestors didn't look at technology as a negative to create it, to have it destroy human being in general. And so we have to differentiate that when we ask about, and it all goes in hand in hand. You cannot have institution structures without technology. So and the word within the spiritual system of itself indicates that when we speak about technology from within the spiritual system, it is in relation to the existence of humanity at the same time as you build system. So the spiritual inner being from within you, as you said, what is right and wrong, are also related to what you attempt to go out and create.
Yeah, I hear that. But when you're saying the technology as a whole, it's not good for us. One will begin to think that
I didn't say the technology as a whole isn't good for us. I said we need to differentiate when we speak about good and bad technology. What is good for us as humans and what is not good for us as humans. In everything you do, there will be a level of technology in that sense. So you cannot exclude absolutely technology from creation and continue to create. It depends what type of purpose you're creating technology for. Are you creating technology to enhance the well-being of the human being? Or are you enhancing technology just to actually seclude and make other sick, masses of people sick in the name of money? That's a big difference. So I'm not against technology in the absolute sense. I very much analyze what technology is inflicting on the human being at the same time, and what good purpose could come out of technology. I mean, look at malaria, for instance, a disease which actually is persistent. We cannot find money to cure simple, at times, diseases, but there could be any unlimited amount of money to create bombs and guns to kill people. That's technology too, but I'm against those form of technology.
Right. It is true. We got to look at, the forms of technology, but I was just looking at it as a whole, because the reason I say that, I kind of look through the eyes of yesterday onto today. History was talking about the past of our ancestors and the position that we are in now. And I think the technology has benefited the majority of black people on the planet. I.e., the reason I say that, in terms of information, in terms of what education provides at that time, information in which we need to learn the tools for life. Now, I think through the emergence of internet technology that we have, has provided a lot of people like you and myself with information that we never preview to, and for free, in the sense is that we have to be connected to the Wi-Fi to receive that. So I think in a way it puts us in a very better position, spiritually, because to understand what happened yesterday through technology, use it in that way, I think is very beneficial.
I absolutely, sorry.
No, go on.
I absolutely agree with you to that in illustration and how you illustrated it. That's true. But at the same time, it depends how we enhance and coordinate and use that educational information as a beneficiary to the masses as well. And at time, I think we are having great exposure and instant exposure to information. You can look it up, but then it takes teachers as well, and it takes mentors as well, and from again a spiritual point of view, to give you better insight as a people to understand the information which you are dealing with, which is in the present, how it's correlated to your past, and what it can do to empower you going forward. And if I look at around the world and we look at the technology and how it's been used, it's been so destructive at times. Like I said previously, one can go onto the internet and try to dig up something. You may punch in a word in Google and it will come up with so much forms of different explanations to things. But if you're not capable to understand what is in front of you and what you are reading, or even understanding it reasonable. So we need teachers and we need guidance and people who will take us through as a people to understand a lot of what's coming out within that instant form of information which we were exposed to, and how it can enhance us to empower us going forward in a better way as a people. So it depends how it is used and who's using it and how they are using it to influence from a positive, constructive way the masses of the communities.
Right, and this is what I said earlier on, and it points me down to, because the reason I asked the question whether technology enhance or distract us or help us, in our spiritual, life, is the fact that we all have access to it. And the reason I say that is down to the individual, like you said, because we all have access. If you look back, say, within the setting of a family home, where everybody, the children, mother, father, auntie, uncle, children all have mobile phones or a form of iPad or form of technology. What you see there, like if we look back in our settings where there was no form of, mobile phone or laptop or, things like that, we all just watch one television, or if you do have television. Now there is this split of attention, the divide in focus, and also the divide in opinion from under the same roof. So look on the structure of technology and how we as individual black people or people used it. And also you look at, you've been the former clinical manager of the Mental Health Caribbean, and also, as I'm specialized, in psychiatric and addiction. You must have seen people with different strain of mental health problem due to technology, because there is also a statistics of people who spend a lot of time playing games or on computer or on their laptop, have developed a lot of symptoms. So that in itself, maybe you can actually say that is not helpful to our spiritual well-being. Is that right?
Well, that's correct, because I encounter, and that's why I had some at times to emphasize, although it seems to a lot of my brothers and sisters in that region, looking like me and you, African people, who are spiritually from within themselves are so confused and mixed up that it tend to create imbalance with their own balance of well-being, whether it will be mentally or physically. Now, to say these people at times were suffering from congenital form of psychiatrical disorder, which means to say a disorder of the mind of itself as a disease, because we tend to look at psychiatry at time as a negative. But if you have a problem with your kidney, you go to the nephrologist. If you have a problem with your heart, you go to the cardiologist, and it's okay. But the brain is also an organ. But to answer that question, like I was trying to explain, a lot of manifested form of psychological, emotional distress, which tend to throw people in our community there in the Caribbean, as I has experienced it, and I'm not unique in that sense. Other African specialists and nurses and doctors who work in that area will tell you the same thing, because of the overwhelming amount of technology and the instruments which people has around them, which create division within the family system, where that division within the family system can tend to materialize into serious confrontation and conflicts, whereof coming out of that as a consequence, again, you are seeing people so totally mixed up and out of balance, whereof it is not a mental problem from the brains, but more a psychological, emotional distress and breakdown of not understanding yourself at time and not understanding the things around you. So it do constitute a lot of problems as such, indeed. So that's why I'm trying to differentiate between the overwhelming amount of information, the instruments which we have to gather all of these information with. And another thing, what you're also seeing, when I was growing up, I was taught more about my African history from my ancestors, from my parents. If I have 10 youngsters around me today in the Caribbean or in Europe for that matter, who are African, and you ask them about, for instance, just to keep it close to home, Malcolm X, or Eldred Cleaver, they wouldn't be able to answer. 8 of the 10 of them wouldn't know who these people is. Whereas in my time, my parents was teaching me already about Marcus Garvey, among so many other leaders of our people on this planet. So on the other hand, we have all of this information, all of the access to it, but yet our people tend to know less about their history, although it is so much in their face at this point in time. So yes, it is damaging.
I mean, let's look at this
could be damaging.
Yeah. Let's look at this social distancing and see if we can put it in context to spirituality or spiritual attack, if you want to call it that. Our children, because this is something, I'm a parent, and it's something I've noticed with my children and lots of parents I've spoken to, where the attention, to get the attention of our children when they are on their phone, it is something of a social distancing or domestic distancing, right? So we live together, we see each other all the time, but we don't talk to each other all the time. Do you think the way we apply technology into our lives is heating up or is actually reducing the level of spiritual menu or ingredients that we need to have in order to understand the core purpose of who we are as this color-skinned people?
Yes, I do think it's the case, and it's clearly the case when you look at, again, coming back to that foundation, the family system, distancing. We speak about the so-called 1.5 meter distancing in relation to COVID, but I mean, these instruments and the new form of technology has already inject or created distancing in your family life of circle within your sisters, your brothers, your children who's preoccupied. If you take it the Western way of counting the hours, 24 hours in a day, they probably would be 16 hours preoccupied with these things, instrument. And so, yes, it disconnects you from understanding the human search and maintenance of yourself from within. You're not really with yourself busy or preoccupied anymore. You're not with the synergy or the dynamics coming off from your interaction, whether it would be emotionally speaking or soothing speaking with your parents telling you a story, or they're giving you a hug, and you're having this natural tenderness of which affect you from within, from a spiritual sense and point of view. Because nothing you do can actually, when it happens, you cannot eliminate that you're not, it doesn't trigger emotional sensation within your physiological and biological reaction from within. That of itself is a form of spirituality which you need to follow and get in contact with and in search of yourself. Now, all of these instruments and the form of technology tend to take away the basis of this form of humanity. So you are not really basically functioning as humans, to my extent, my conclusion to an extent. You're basically reflecting to instant triggers from these form of instruments, new forms of technology. So you become a sort of a robot in essence, so to speak.
Okay, we're going to go for a pause. I mean, before we do that, this music is going to take us to the top of the hour. It's a music that I haven't played for years and years and years. Why? Because I used to have a friend, her name is Nashipa. She's the Kenyan lady who have gone through a lot of, suffering with the social service here and everything else. And she used to love this music to beat. She let me record this track on a whole CD, which is about 12 or so times or 14 times. And since that time, I couldn't listen to this track anymore. And you decided to choose this track. It's called Slavery Days. So what's going to happen? We're going to go in for the short pause. But when we come back, I want to actually, for you to tell us why you chose Slavery Days. Because I haven't listened to this for the past 15 years. Only today.
Okay.
All right. So we're here on Feferity Radio. My name is Freestyle, and you're listening to Kenneth Cuvalay in the Netherlands, a social psychiatric nurse, a special.
For Africans, it's not healthy for us to stay here all winter. That's a real problem for us because we need intense sunlight all of the time. And the darker you are, the more vulnerable you are by staying in dim areas of the country and not getting adequate exposure. So I have found ever since I healed myself of cancer in '86 that I cannot stay here through the winter. I actually feel the strain and I feel the dipping into my reserves of energy. So I just go to the tropics where I was indigenously born and created to be and get sunlight.
Original. 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 Original.
Playing your all day, every day. Playing your favorite songs. This is Feferity Radio.
Of course, we can write about flowers and beads and birds and trees. and lovers in a park and all them something there. But what do you ever write about them something there? When if you sit down late in the park at night, man come and shoot you and take away you man and rape her. What do you ever write about flowers? When the air pollution wither it up. Right now the reality out there different. We have to write about South Africa, the youth in the ghetto. We have to write about the England. We have to write about all these things.
Well, I want to welcome you back here on Feferity Radio. My name is Freestyle, and as you can hear, this is the track I haven't actually listened to or played for over 15 years or so, probably longer than that, because there was a friend of mine who, she used to like this music, and he actually, what they call it, forced me to record this track on a whole CD, and since that time, I don't even want to know about the content. But here is Kenneth Cuvalay, my special guest on the line, a social psychiatric nurse specializing in psychiatric addiction and psychoeducation. Also, a former clinical manager of mental health Caribbean. He chose this one. So, Kenneth, welcome back.
Thank you.
So, tell us about.
Thank you, brother.
Yeah, you're welcome, sir. Tell us about this track, because as I said, I haven't listened to it or played it for such a long time. Slavery Days. Tell us about it.
Well, okay. Like I said a while ago, although we are so much exposed to so much information nowadays, most of our children, most of our young African youths does not even understand or even know anything what is related to slavery days. When I was a kid growing up, my parents used to set me down. Like we used to have to sit down and they will read certain part of the Bible and explain it to you. We were sat down, put to sit down, and my mother and father used to explain us what is the significance of the terminology slavery days, because they have themselves, who were not anymore living on the motherland but was brought by force into different parts of the Caribbean and the America, was still going through slavery days, the way they had to maintain their life in order to make sure that bread and drink was on the table, or food to eat in general was there to feed you. The humiliation they would have to go through from the rich people by doing the most humiliating forms of work just in order to maintain a life was and is and still remain a form of slavery in these days today. And a lot of our people have been caught up in the technology as such. Technology is also, if you don't understand the purpose of it, and you become mentally addicted or conditioned to just to accept it by not analyzing and looking at it purposely, or even teaching our children what is the purpose of it negatively or positively, with what kind of a beneficiary it is to your well-being and to your position in life today, you end up being captured in a new form of technological enslavement as such. And that's why I chose this tune, to make it clear that slavery days did not end up ending for us as African.
Well, let's take the track.
As a matter of fact, I beg your pardon?
I said let's hear the track now.
Okay.
And then when we come back, because we're going to talk about slavery, and also I've got a question as well whilst you're talking, because I've been hearing this song, and I was born in Freetown, Sierra Leone, but our generation wasn't really forced to comprehend what happened back then. And I believe that young people around the world who are black, especially within the age of 50 or below, cannot comprehend. Probably those in the under 70s might be comprehensional, but for us as young people, it's difficult for us to comprehend what happened back then, because what we are living right now, we are seeing a very similar thing, especially at this time. But let's take the track. And when we come back, we allow Sir Kenneth Cuvalay to talk more about slavery days. This is Burning Spear, Slavery Days.
us too. Do you remember the days of slavery? Some of us survived. Do you remember the days of slavery? Showing them that we are still alive. Do you remember the days of slavery? Do you remember the days of slavery? Do you remember the days of slavery? History can recall. History can recall. Do you remember the days of slavery? History can recall the days of slavery. Do you remember the days of slavery? Oh, slavery days. Do you remember the days of slavery? Oh, slavery days. Do you remember the days of slavery? Try and remember, please remember. Do you remember the days of slavery? Do you, do you, do you, do you, do you, do you? Do you remember the days of slavery? Oh, slavery days. Do you remember the
Welcome back. My name is Freestyle, and you're listening to Feferity Radio, your nostalgic station. My special guest on the line, Kenneth Cuvalay in the Netherlands, from Eustachius. He's a social psychiatric nurse specialized in psychiatric addictions and psychoeducation. He also was a former clinical manager of Mental Health Caribbean. He's on the line. He chose his slavery days. So welcome, Sir Kenneth.
Yes, my brother, Freestyle. Thank you again.
That's a very powerful track there when you listen to it. But I don't know, my spiritual mind or my spiritual brain always thinks of something, and I'm a thinking man, and I always do think. But when I listen to this track, yes, I understand because it's history, it's always recalling. That is true. But what I've noticed also amongst the elders, they always pushing this narrative, forcing the agenda to comprehend slavery days. And for most young people, this young generation these days, you know, they don't feel connected to that. So do you think, because the way that the older generation have been forcing this agenda to comprehend, to be like so we were there, whilst of course we are now facing a new form of what you will interpret as a slavery. Do you think that's why for young people are not really connecting to that?
It depends. I don't necessarily agree that because of that in the absolute sense. I think it depends on how you encounter young people and give them a sense of being involved or having an input to what you're trying to give them better insight to. It's interrelated activity then. It's an interrelated, say, mechanism between you and me or my kids having a conversation. I confront my kids at time with an explanation to slavery days, and they will then ask me the question, well, I would never been a slave, and so I never been
Well,
to
they said that to
Africa,
you. They said that to you.
Yeah, and it's nothing wrong with that.
No, I mean, that is what you call a norm. I mean, a new norm. This is exactly my experience.
Right. So the more important thing is to then elaborate on that reaction of your kids and put it back to them with a more insight-giving contents to think around them. Because one of the things which I realize and notice, whether it's in the Caribbean or in the Netherlands or in the UK or wherever you find African young people, brothers and sisters, a lot of them has a sense that there is something very unjust going on with them in these communities. But at the same time, they are not really capable always to put it into context, into the broader context. And if you look at our history, and if you look at our position of our people today, whether or not they were born in Africa or not, like the song just repeated over and over, how we have been refused in so many ways. Now, you may not be refused to go into a shop and they will say to you, well, I wouldn't sell you the burger because you have the money and I will refuse selling it to you. But if you look at education, the right commission, the right position in the educational structures for you to obtain education in a good way, or medical treatment, or actually, for that matter, finding a job. Many times you have been secluded just because of your race based on that, from even if you have their capability. You are many times been discriminated institutionally based on racism and discrimination to seclude you. And the other thing, if you want to go and choose and live in a particular area in most of these communities in Europe, they designated you already to be in a ghetto where you will have actually the place to find to live, or you have entrepreneur plan to open up a business, but then you go into this bank and you want to get the funding for you to start up your business. The red tapes and so forth, which will be thrown at you, would actually reject you even to come into terms of getting these funding to start your business. So, in essence, slavery has become more sinister, and it's our people who are the sufferers within these barriers of these institutions, which is living the legacy of slavery over and over and keeping it alive when it comes to institutional racism and discrimination. Now, if you do not understand what is the context of what is the meaning in contents of racism and discrimination, yes, you will have no clue of these instruments which are actually marginalizing you and depriving you over and over. So, yes, I think how our parents went about things at time was to maybe impose it on you, but yet on the other hand, our parents were struggling with the level of insight which they had, and a lot of division as well, because mind you, a lot of our young people went away and came back to their islands in different parts of Africa with the attitude and the traditions of European-centered mindset as well, which put them in conflict with their own traditions back home. So it's a very complex issue.
It is very complex. Also, I think there is a kind of there's this kind of lack of patience and understanding between, this is my experience, between the older generation and the younger generation, whereby I think the older generation seems to be pushing this narrative, but also not giving ear to the younger generation to understand or to put out their case of understanding how they understand it is through their eyes of how they're living now. Because, I mean, you know, to imagine someone was in a shackle, tied in chains, is very, very difficult to imagine that. However, if you look at our hip-hop artists and our musicians, some of them, especially in the 80s and so 90s, decorated themselves with a lot of shackles. And it's very interesting. Their arms, you know, on their neck, everything like that. So it is very difficult to kind of, to put it into perspective. But I believe that the older generation need to sit down and listen to the younger generation in terms of how they see slavery operating through their experience. Don't you think so?
I do agree with you, but they need to sit down. And like I said a while ago, I disapprove of some of the methods and approach which the elderly take towards the younger generation. I have two kids. They were born in Europe. And at a point in time, I had to sit down and listen to them, hear where they are coming from, with the influences from their environment, which is in Europe, and see how I can balance that out and give them still the necessary insight of their history, which is related to me. And if it's related to me, to somehow, some point down the line, it's related to them because they are Africans in these communities. But yet, you have to find that balancing act and how them feel that they have an input into the dialogue or the conversation. It isn't that I can come up and say, because my parents went through this and I went through this, this is the way you're supposed to think. It doesn't work that way. So I think it's a very careful balancing act, but nevertheless, you can only know your future if you know what the concept of your past was about. And I think a lot of our young people need to know more, because although they are with these conflicting environmental norms, principles, and values from a Eurocentric point of view, many times, you can see a lot of them will explain, I don't feel myself always at home. I am having the sense that there's something beyond me which I need to know about. So there's where your kids, the younger one, will give you an opening for you to actually explore it with them more and give them more insight as to how a mutual discussion on a level with mutual respect, not because I'm the elderly, I supposed to know it always better. That's not the case. You wouldn't have give people a sense of involvement or a sense to be even interacting with you or to sit down and listen to you from that point of view if you conduct it like that. So yes, our parents and a lot of elderly people fail. And I give here in Amsterdam weekend school in relation to African history and culture. It amazed me to see when I present these kids with certain our heroes and sheroes and engineers and scientists who are black, who has never been heard within the educational system. When they start questioning me about certain things, they are pretty much involved in the dynamics of those discussions. And I'm not going to give them or push them aside just because they are kids. I'm learning from them at the same time while they are putting me on focus. So it's a good thing and it's a healthy thing. And I think that that is an attitude a lot of our elderly people need to adopt in order to connect with their younger people.
In terms of what the enslavers have done, there is a list of things that they've done. If you look at genocide, the cultural manipulation, traditional, what you call cloning, and all of that. They've done all of that, and it's very, 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 very bad. But I want us to focus also, because if we're focusing on what the enslavers have done, and which of course is not yet over, but fail to see what we are doing to ourselves. And I think the responsibility supposed to be and the focus supposed to be there. When we talk about the enslavers, I mean what the enslavers has done in terms of genocide. But what we're doing to ourselves, for example, if we look at the Caribbean, I mean, now you got COVID, so I mean COVID-19, so the place is quite quiet. I mean, we don't hear about gunshot and killing and things like that. But when we look at the way people are killed, especially people who've lived outside of the Caribbean and want to go back home to retire, I mean, how they've been mercilessly killed, and people can kill you just because you step on their new shoes. All this sort of lifestyle that we now perpetuate into ourselves. I mean, one have actually said also is the syndrome, is a slavery syndrome. But what do you put, I mean, what advice would you give? Because we know the things that the enslaver has done, which is very bad. But what sort of advice would you give to African people around the world listening who are perpetuating the hate against one another, who could not see that we're brothers and sisters and understanding we've got a tradition that is so valuable, so strong, so powerful, but yet still going on the same way that most of, like you said, our ancestors and even people today have suffered from the hands of the enslaver? What sort of advice and area would you give to people so that they can look out and they can so we can reframe, or people can reframe from doing this silly killing for nothing, hatred for nothing?
Yeah, my personal answer to that is as follows. Yes, when you look at what the enslavers have done and inflict upon us. It is important we know that as history to actually shed light on our history or our heritage and what we was about as a people. What kind of a civilization from a higher level our ancestors had in mind. And when it comes to that question, I think our people has been distracted with a sense of, and I don't justify the notion it is all because of slavery. We have a lot of academics, we have a lot of educated people today, we have a lot of people who should know better. I think a lot of our people are corrupt as well. I think a lot of our people are just looking and being self-centered and go along with the Western form of approach while neglecting the bigger interest for the broader community. So to answer your question, I think our strive should be a more collective form of coming together, cooperating, and letting go that internal hatred which we tend to hold on to at times to disadvantage each other. I'm not saying we're going to be pure in the sense of as a people, because other people kill within as well, but at the same time, they are still very much focused on the broader collective interests which maintain them and guarantee them to have a fundamental position as a people on this planet. We tend to ignore all of that. And my advice or my personal view is that we need to put our petty differences as not number one priority aside and try to enhance and work together as a common people. Because wherever you look, the Chinese, whether they are having different groups among themselves, you cannot go into their community and overtake them. They're going to be maintaining that one collective interest. The Western powers does it all the time. Russia and the US may speak out against each other, but when it comes to their broader imperialistic interests, they are all one, because they will all exploit Africa and they will all take the wealth out of Africa collectively together. The Russian does it with their weapons sale. The Western world, the rest of the Western world does it differently. The Dutch has their shell taking our oil out of the Ogoni region in Nigeria. So again, we as a people let it happen. I think we as a people are very much responsible in today's world as to how we cooperate, live together, and respect each other, and how we want to continue in the future, unless we realize that the vulnerability and the failing for success lies a lot in our hands as well. We can put it and use it as a convenient excuse and say it's all because of colonialism and slavery. I'm not abandoning my views on colonial powers, just to be clear on that. But I do think that we have a responsibility with the knowledge and what we know. We should be able to form a different form of alliance more collectively, constructively, by working together to maintain a more collective, broader interest among our people.
It is so true. I mean, also if we, focus also on these traits and psychological impact that slavery has left upon the people. We should not also be looking at the good ones, but also the bad ones, because amongst us you got people that do, child traffickers. And these are respectable people, intelligent people, and yet they occupy in the behavior that one determines to be very, very brutal against oneself. What do you make of, or what sort of, what do you make of the whole thing about this child trafficking within our community? But also, we're looking at ways in which this thing can help people cope, because there's a lot of people who have fallen victim into this behavior. And if you were talking of slavery and looking at our spiritual well-being, it's about understanding the things that happened before, making sure that they don't happen again. But when we continue with this sort of behavior, do you think that will help us as a whole to unify our spiritual wellness as a collective?
No, because it come back to the same explanation. Unless we realize we, as a people, has to have a collective sense of dignity among ourselves and good leadership, very good leader. I'm not saying all our leaders going to be perfect. That's not what I'm trying to say. But the general overall view is that a lot of our role models, who's supposed to be role models as leaders, go along and be caught up or let themselves be bought, and to be bought in a sense that they couldn't give hell what happened to the masses of our own people. And so they leave our people in despair and all kind of a form of social misery for those who want to prey on our people to come in. And you talk about a human marketplace with the trade. Look at for instance, how they impoverished Haiti systematically since the move of Toussaint Louverture to throw out the Western powers out of that country. Haiti didn't end up into that situation only because of internal corruption. It is a combination of our people who are puppet on a chain, who serve the French and the US leaders and power structures in order to marginalize and to penalize Haiti and put them into that situation as to prevent a precedent of any attempt of such happening in the Western Hemisphere ever again. And so, based on that, Haiti has been used today as a human marketplace where African young children from that region are being sold and being exploited and being sent into prostitution throughout the different regions of the Americas. So, and yet a lot of our leaders took part in that. The Duvalier era in Haiti represented the interests of the Western powers. I think was what his name, Aristide, was the first president who attempted to go and challenge the notion that the perpetrators, which is France, is getting reparation for committing horrendous crime against humanity on the Haitian people, who is being paid instead of the people who have become victims. They how to pay reparation to France, which is the opposite world. I think Aristide was the first leader who contested that, and you saw what happened to him. But again, a lot of our action we have to realize would go with sacrifices. Aristide did sacrifice, but Duvalier and his cronies and all of them who represent the foreign interests, that was their game. And so our leaders, in the bigger sense, have to take responsibility and give the masses of our community a sense of having a role to play at the same time, not being leaders and excluding the people as such because you tend to know better. It doesn't work that way.
Talk about the preoccupation of the enslavers and the assassination of African identity.
Are you still there?
Yeah. Did you hear what I just said?
No.
I said,
Sorry.
no, sorry about it. It's all right. I said, talk us, about the preoccupation of the enslavers and the assassination of the African identity.
Look, okay, I will differentiate that in two forms. First, let me give a little insight. The preoccupation of the enslavers was indeed the assassination of African identity. And then when we talk about African identity, we need to understand what is the meaning of it in essence. Because the enslavers realized that, like I said earlier, Africans who knew and know themselves may be forced into captivity or captive labor for that matter, but can never be enslaved in the most profound ways. And when you say you cannot enslave a people in the most profound way, no matter what kind of measures or instrument or tools you use in order to dehumanize people as such, once you have people who know themselves That is meaning from the standpoint of spirituality and mental force within yourself. You're always going to be prepared to actually pay the price for preserving your identity. Your identity is the basic foundation of what your whole civilization has been built on and has been based on. Once you cannot break that, you are not going to be subject to be, how must I put it, be reformed from thinking as a human being with your power to that of a mule. Once you realize that, we can go forward. That is something the enslavers realized from the onset, that in order to break our people powers, you have to break them believing in themselves spiritually and mentally, so that they cannot retain their identity as a people. And at the same time, if you look through the Americas, again, I always have to come back to Haiti and parts of Trinidad and Cuba. A lot of our ancestors' tradition in relation to ceremonies, values, institution, custom, spiritual system, even language, are still being maintained in the Caribbean as such up until today. I think I mentioned it last week. The Yoruba people from Western Africa are overwhelmingly a group of Cuban community, part of Trinidad as well, Brazil, etc., etc. So they still maintain a sense of what we're supposed to be fighting for, with the necessary form of what you will say strength of determination to continue building our communities and our holding on to our African identity. They still believe in these things. Unless you find us coming together and having a broader collective concept and idea what it is about to be speaking about Africanism and our identity in relation to spirituality and mentality, you are not going to reach that level where we need to go as a collective, because you do need the ingredients and the insight of what our ancestors' strategies for survival in a hostile world of the plantation, which we are still are in many ways. Even into Europe today, I may tend to say we are living into a sort of plantation among our people in many ways, but that needs more explanation to it. We need to understand these strategies for survival in a hostile world. We are living in a hostile world constantly. We are the only people, I think, at many times which fail to understand we are worrying about others frequently and in many ways, while we are in a constant war of survival on this planet. So we need to turn the table from another angle to get another view in order to continue to maintain a broader basis of foundation to make us a greater people. We are a great people already, but we need to come together.
It is true. And also, I believe also, instead of turning the table, we can just swap chairs. So we go around and sit in different positions.
Exactly. It just was an example, but it can be executed in so many different forms.
Yeah, because sometimes turning the table means that, you sit in the same chair.
Yeah.
Your
last word fell away. Your last word fell away. What was the same chair?
No, I said sometimes when you turn the table around, the people who are sitting on the chairs still sitting there. So we need to move the chairs. We need to move around instead of turning the table, so that everybody's got a share of it.
I do agree with you. And I think just to emphasize and to add to it, for instance, like I said earlier, if you look at certain, let me just give you a little idea. There is no longer any any form of power which should stop us from doing what we need to do. For instance, if you look at African spirituality, like I said earlier, Benin, for one, has thrown out the European religion of Catholicism and reclaimed voodoo as a national spiritual system. Now, going back to voodoo, it is not only based on ceremonies and rituals. It's a system of itself within your civilization from so many angles. It is also a system of governance at the same time. So a lot of our structures, language, and forms of civilization relating again to institution in regard to our spiritual system has been distorted and actually destroyed. And we need to focus on a time to give our younger people a better view as to how the present is relating to them and how to go in the future. They need to have some sense and knowledge of insight of what their previous history and ancestors' civilization was based on. And unless we do all of these things, we are not going to actually be making much headway, because the Western world isn't going to do it for us, because it was never meant for them to do it, because if that was the case, they would have never been our enslavers in the first place.
So what do you make of the way that we eat these days? I mean, when we eat, or the kind of food we eat, we don't really be thankful, and we don't really give praises. We don't remember those who can't. We just eat. Do you think that is helpful to our spiritual well-being?
No, because we always use the phrase thanks and praise. The food didn't come just walking like that. Somebody had to create the food. Somebody had to do something for us to eat. This notion that is so automatism that we have food is a sense of being spoiled at the same time, as if it just happened, as if it just all falls out of the sky. And so it is as if you have to look at the environment around you. People go around, tend to look at a tree and chop the tree down as if the tree has no meaning to our existence. Everything in nature has its place. Everything in nature has a purpose. So everything in nature needs to be protected and looked at as sacred. And if one disregards the powers and the role of these different elements, which keeps us together as one big piece of puzzle to exist, to eat, we are actually making a categorically mistake. And you're seeing that too, because even when it comes to food, the sense of good food at times has been pushed aside, and a lot of us tend to really hold on to the junk food and the rest of it. And look at young people nowadays, young women, young girls, with all of the growth hormones in so many of these things which we eat, are having tremendous effect on our younger people health and well-being. So if we actually, and on the other hand, one good thing I might say, some of the things coming out of COVID-19, I think it's driving a lot of people to go back to spirituality and the sense of spiritualism within creating their own sense of going out there and seeing the earth, use the earth as a source of power and see how it can produce food. In the Caribbean now, a lot of people tend to go back to their natural, original, authentic form of planting.
So it's helping.
I beg your pardon?
I said it's helping us to be more traditional, look into more traditional ways.
Exactly. But at the same time, respecting the nature around us, the earth, the trees, the air, everything in nature has its place. And once we cannot respect the surrounding around us anymore and tend that we are above the cosmos or the universe with all with it given to us, we are arrogant as people.
Indeed. We've got much to cover, and we've covered quite a few today. We've come towards the end of it. And I want to say really thank you very much, Sir Kenneth Cuvalay. Is there any words of courage you want to leave with us?
The word of encouragement which I always like to leave with us is thanking our African community and the UK broader listeners who are there listening, showing interest in these ideas, topics, and especially to emphasize our African community, whereof I hope that they can contribute to these moments of coming together by having their input as well and contributing to your program along with me and us from a broader sense, and try to work together to enhance the status and the position of our people in a broader sense on this planet as we continue to live on this planet, and hoping to see a better situation for our younger people.
Thank you very much. There's a text here before you go. It says, a beautiful intellectual discussion. Thank you, guest. Thank you. That's from Leo.
You're welcome, my brother.
Well, thank you very much, Sir Cuvalay, and we'll have another conversation here next week, Tuesday. All been well.
Okay, good night and be safe, everyone. Thank you. Thank you.
And I'm going to send you with your track that you, the one of the tracks also that you chose, Humble African by Culture.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank the broader community for listening. Good night, everybody.
Thank you, and good night.
Okay, good night to you, brother Freestyle.
And regards there to all of the listeners in the Caribbean, in the Netherlands, and also in the Caribbean, and your family respect. This is Humble African by Culture. You're listening to Freestyle here, speaking to Kenneth Cuvalay, social psychiatric nurse, specialized in psychiatric addiction and psychoeducation. Also, he was a former member, former clerical manager of Mental Health Caribbean. He chose Humble African.
I'm on this land, I trouble no one. My desire is to make no problem with no one. None interference, none political. No matter what you do, I see I'm blind and hear and deaf. I'm an humble African. Passing through Babylon, I'm an humble African. Trouble no one, say I'm an humble African. Some said I'm a Rastaman, I'm an humble African. These little hands and simple fingers that I have, they were not made to pinch nor tear, you hear, but to move in deeds of kindness, you see, and to fall in thoughts of prayer to help my brother pray for the betterment of his life, yeah. Oh yeah. It's better to have a friend than to need one. It's better to find a friend than to be in need. Lift up your brother, don't you put him down. One and wash the other. Go and back it home. I'm a humble African. I was born to love my brother. I'm an humble African. United I must be. I'm an humble African. No matter what they say, I'm an humble African. My forefather came here from the days of slave. I work until my skin starts to strip. And to every time I speak for my justice, yes, someone always to name me disagreeable still. I pray the day will come
when we all have peace and unity. No more chasing one another without humanity. I pray the day will come that we all share what we have and show the people of the love that we have to give. Let them know I'm an humble African. Nothing but unity inside, I'm an humble African. Just stand for us all, the humble African. Let me beat my drum in a Babylon and a humble African. Yeah, you know who I am, a humble African.
Now, brothers and sisters, good night. Hope you're feeling all right. Well, here comes Freestyle.